Everyone, welcome to the first It's Taboo Let's Talk for 2023. My name is Sophia Abdul Kawi. I'm the founder and executive director of Muslim Sisters Staten Island, and I'm so happy to have you guys here today. And we're going to talk about a subject that is unfortunately plaguing our communities for far too long. It's slavery and human sex trafficking. And I'm so honored to be able to do this program with Northwell University Hospital. And today we're going to be introducing to you a survivor of human sex trafficking and have discussions about the subject matter and the ways that we can support those who are affected by it, and also to help prevent this from happening. Thank you so much, and welcome to It's Taboo, Let's Talk.
Thank you, Sophia.
Hey.
Hi, Sophia. How are you? Thank you for having us and hosting us today.
Anytime, Sadiqa. We welcome Sadiqa Addy from Northwell University Hospital. She's a community health nurse, and she'll be hosting and introducing the rest of the speakers tonight. So take it away, Sadiqa.
Thank you, Sophia. Thank you so much for having us. This is a very important topic to Staten Island University Hospital Northwell Health. Like you said, this is a very big topic that a lot of people don't want to talk about, and it is plaguing our communities and actually nationally. We are here with the experts from Northwell Health and from our community. So let me introduce you one by one. We have Dr. Dana Kaplan. Dana, how are you? Thank you so much for joining us.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me.
Tell us about yourself, please.
Sure. So hi, everybody. I work at Staten Island University Hospital. I'm the director of child abuse and neglect there. I'm also the medical director of the Staten Island Child Advocacy Center. I am a child abuse pediatrician, so I am trained to evaluate suspected cases of child physical abuse, child sexual abuse, neglect, medical child abuse, and my specific area of interest is in human trafficking, which is what brings me here tonight.
Thank you, Dana. I really appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
And next I have Dr. Paulo Santos. Hi, Dr. Santos. How are you?
I'm good. How you doing?
Thank you for joining us. So can you please tell us a little bit about yourself?
Sure. Thank you for having me here tonight, Sadiqa. My name is Dr. Santos Paulus. I'm a family medicine physician. I work at Huntington Hospital, a part of Northwell. I'm the senior program director for the Human Trafficking Task Force. We focus on education, advocacy, response, and training. And I'm also founder and president of Cycling for Change, a not-for-profit where we raise funds and awareness to fight human trafficking, and married and father of 4 girls.
That's amazing. Girls are the best.
Absolutely.
Next, I have Miss Yolanda Green. Hi, Yolanda. Thanks for joining us today. Oh, you're on mute.
There you go. Thanks so much for having me. My name is Yolanda Green. I am the program manager for our human trafficking response program at Northwell Health. And I oversee all of the hospitals and our task forces, and I work very closely with Dr. Kaplan and Dr. Paulus, and just making sure that the education is not only in our hospitals, but as well as in our communities. So thank you.
100%. Awareness and education is the biggest thing that we can do. And last but not least, I have Miss Laura Millen.
Hello, my name is Laura Mullen, and I am a survivor leader in the fight to end human trafficking. I have the first Survivor Advisory Board on Long Island that I have started. So I'm the co-founder and president of that, as well as the anti-traffic service advocate for ECLI Vibes in Suffolk County, New York.
That is phenomenal, and you inspire us all, Laura. So we appreciate you joining us and bringing whatever you have to this table and bringing education and awareness to our communities throughout New York City. So you can please give us a brief education on your story and let us know what's going on.
Sure. So my story started many years ago. I was about 12 years old the first time I was trafficked. It was actually by my older brother. He trafficked me to some dealers of his. At the time, he had told me how to escape. He had like this huge plan, like you're going to go and you're going to drive with them to this block. When you get to this stop sign, you're going to get out and run. And I followed his direction because he was my older brother. And so that's exactly what I did. But I didn't know that all the trauma that I had experienced as a child was going to lead me down a path when I was older from that healing, where I would actually wind up using drugs, being in the street. And that's when my trafficking started. I had met somebody out of a local 7-Eleven who was a dealer at the time. And he said, "Oh, you look like you need a shower and I have this for you." And for me, a shower sounded great. And then you had drugs too. I want that also, So I had went with him, but little did I know I would be stuck in his basement for a little over a week. And so being stuck in the basement with no way to get out, I did exactly what he said. He threatened. There was aggression. There was, other girls there that he had in the house as well. That was just one of my experiences. Even after getting out of that, I still, yet again, it happened, and it happened numerous times until I was incarcerated. Once I became incarcerated, they broke into one of the cops ran into one of the hotels, and they found me there and a bunch of other people. I was arrested and incarcerated. And it was really in jail where I started to turn around. I was like, okay, I'm off the drugs. This can change. That's kind of like how I was able to escape the entire trafficking life, was by going into the incarceration system. While I was incarcerated, I kind of had to change everything from the inside, because I needed to heal, right? I needed to find ways where I would not end up back in that life, where my trauma would not hold me down. And while I was in there is where I met the co-founders of ECLI Vibes. They actually do work inside of the incarcerational system, if that's a word. And they came in, and I started having trauma therapy, and realizing that, oh my gosh, I don't have to be this way forever. I don't have to turn back to drugs. I don't have to go back to the streets. I don't have to rely on these men for anything anymore. It was just all about changing my choices when I got out, and really sticking to them and being persistent. I read some books in there that helped me really with that, teaching me self-care and giving me the knowledge that I needed that would lead me to where I am today with you guys. Eventually, I got out of prison, and I came home, and I started working with ECLI Vibes still. And I now work for them, and my life has done a complete 360. I live every day of my life trying to give people knowledge on trafficking and that it exists out here. And it's not like a movie. It's not like, the movie Taken, I'm sure everybody's familiar with, and, you're getting kidnapped at the airport. Those instances do occur and they do happen. But that's not what we're seeing here in Suffolk County, or in a lot of our areas of Nassau County, even into the city. Even though these things are happening, girls are being taken around the tri-state, New Jersey, even out of state. But that's not what we see. We see a lot of trauma, hurt people on drugs, and eventually just leads them down this path that they feel that they're hopeless in and that they'll never get out. So I really just, when I founded the Survivor Advisory Board with ECLI, it was really just to spread the word and help others be empowered, and to know that, they don't have to be hopeless anymore. There is hope out there. It doesn't last forever. I think when you're out there, you do think like, this is all I'm good for. This is all I ever be. A lot of us, we had lives before that. And it's kind of like, I'll never be able to go back to being that person again. Um, so eventually you do, though, and you do come back. And here I am today, luckily able to share this screen with you guys, be on this web show, and just really getting the word out there to others, how trafficking exists here on Long Island and in our tri-state area. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Laura. That is incredible. You are such a strong woman, and you really gave me goosebumps. Like, my skin is just like,
All right.
no, because it's the reality of it. And there's so many people out there that just don't want to hear or see it. And someone like you going out and speaking about it from your own trauma and experiences is the best way to educate people. And, the Survivor Advisory Board is something so strong and so needed within our communities. I commend you so much on your work and what you do, and would love to, get the word out to hopefully help your organization.
Absolutely.
So thank you so much. And it's actually pretty crazy because people don't realize that, you can be trafficked by your family members. And that is, one of the biggest cases out there, where we can fall into our first question right now and go into what is human trafficking? And I'm actually going to take this question and forward it towards Yolanda. So Yolanda, can you answer that question for us about what is human trafficking?
Sure.
You answered this question so many times.
It's okay. I've just broken it down into the smallest terms. It's the exploitation of people, for profit. Someone is profiting off of someone's labor, and any types. When you look at human trafficking, sex trafficking, labor trafficking, someone is making money for that person's labor, for that person's time. So that's like the easiest term. We have the best experts in Dr. Kaplan and Dr. Paulus too. Please join in. But we do a lot of education in the schools, and the easiest way, instead of going through the whole, we'll go into the force, the coercion, if these things are happening. But the kids just what does this mean? Someone's making money, people for profit. And
yeah. And so that brings us to the second question. Who are the victims of human trafficking? Dr. Santosh? I see you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you, Sadiq. And I just wanted to kind of say the same thing what you said about Laura. Laura, you're you just when you speak, there's so much power in what you're sharing. So we just say thank you for sharing your experiences with us. That way we can learn with you. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
So who are the victims of human trafficking? Like Yolanda was saying, it's any person that's getting exploited for another person's profit. And so when we look at the victims of human trafficking, it can happen in just many different kind of occupations and industries. Polaris kind of breaks it down into 25 kind of common businesses or industries that where victims are found. So you could think of places like in construction and domestic servitude, within healthcare, in factories, agricultural, kind of the list goes on. If you think about as many industries as there are, there's going to be trafficking that's occurring in those areas. But a lot of times those numbers that we get in those kind of areas from Polaris, it depends on people's access to contacting the National Human Trafficking Hotline. That way they can kind of get incorporated into those numbers. So it's very varied as to who could be a victim of human trafficking.
So basically, just throwing this out there, at any age you can be a victim. It doesn't identify gender or age, correct?
No, there's anyone can really be affected. It doesn't matter what your race is, what your ethnicity is, what your age is. There are groups that are more likely to be trafficked, marginalized groups and vulnerable groups, but it's a crime against all of humanity. So it's really anyone could be affected by human trafficking.
Thanks, Dr. Paulus. We have our third question actually is, what if a trafficked victim consents? So what if somebody that is being sexually trafficked or, labor trafficked, they're consenting that this is okay with them, but deep down inside, they don't want to do this, but verbally they're consenting. What happens then? Dana, if you can share your thoughts on that.
Sure. And I just want to echo what everyone has said about Laura. Laura, thank you so much for sharing your narrative and your experience. It's tremendous. And, that's kind of a hard question for me because I'm a pediatrician. So I work with children.
Yeah.
Children can't consent to be exploited. That's true under federal law. That's true from what we know about the development of children. And what I would say in my very humble opinion is that what I know as a doctor is that children become adults, and sometimes what happens is behavior is started as when you're younger and more vulnerable, and it continues because that's what you know. So can you consent to become exploited? I mean, I would argue, that's unlikely. I understand when you're an adult. Yeah. Under federal law, you have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. But I would, again, in my practice, children are vulnerable by the very nature of being children. So it's the population I work with, I would say no, my population can't.
Okay, thanks, Dana. And then we have the fourth question is, how widespread is human trafficking, and how big of a problem is it in New York? Speaking to staff within the hospital, people in the community, a lot of people are like, oh no, it doesn't happen here on Staten Island, or no, New Jersey, I've never heard of it. But then you hear on the news, these victims are being exploited, or they're being trafficked. The recent one over the summer about the young woman who they saw, being picked up by a truck. I don't know if you guys remember that story on the turnpike, and how the turnpike corridor is like this big line of human trafficking. They're able to traffic victims from state lines from state to state. Laura, how would you answer that question? What would you think about that?
I think that up until recently, there was no data showing how big of an trafficking really is.
Yeah.
The data that we have found and that has come about most recently, the numbers are astounding. Like, just, you wouldn't never believe it. In Suffolk County alone, we've had and just in my agency, helped about almost 2,000 victims of trafficking in the last couple of years. And we're talking about I think the numbers were at 90 traffickers were arrested recently in the last couple of years since Scatty started. So, and that's just in Suffolk County. Plenty of cases and that have not been reported, right? And the underreported cases so yeah, the numbers are really high, and we're like the fourth largest state in the United States, next to like Texas and Florida, and I want maybe Hawaii or something, as far as data goes for how many trafficking scenarios there have been reported.
Dana and Dr. Kaplan, what are your thoughts about this? Because I know you're the director of child abuse and neglect for Staten Island University Hospital. You deal with pediatrics, that community. What are your thoughts about that?
I think that the numbers are grossly underestimated, and that's for a variety of reasons. We know that in child abuse in general, you have to be at a place where you're ready to disclose, and not everyone comes to that place right away. We know that from the data on child sexual abuse, for example, it takes between 5 to 10 years, if ever, for someone to disclose something that has happened to them. So the numbers aren't always reflective of what's going on in real time. So there's always issues with data and statistics in child abuse in general. And again, I'm putting this under that umbrella for my purposes in terms of, again, the population that I see. What's very interesting is that this year, every year, the government collects data on calls to Child Protective Services. The data is a little bit delayed, so the most recent data we have is from 2020. And very interestingly, this is the first year that one of the categories of abuse listed, they usually list neglect, physical abuse, sexual abuse, and then other. This was the first year they've listed sex trafficking as a percentage of the population of founded cases. So there are approximately 618,000 founded cases reported to Child Protective Services in 2020, 0.2% of that was sex trafficking. So it's about like 15,000 or so. That's, again, and that's grossly underestimating, I think, the problem. As we start to collect more data in the years to come, we might see some more information come through.
So I am, this is a side question from my own personal thoughts. With COVID, we all thought that, okay, everyone's indoors, everyone should be safe, nothing should be going on. Human sex trafficking are definitely not happening. Yeah, I mean, this is what I've heard. So, and I'm clinically speaking, I know that's definitely not the truth. Dr. Paulus, what do you think about that?
Yeah, it's during COVID, I mean, the lockdown, I mean, people were stuck at home. So it just depends on kind of what's going on at home as to whether it's a safe place or not. A lot of kids were sad they couldn't hang out with their friends. Other kids were terrified because they had to be at home with parents or somebody that was taking care of them that was abusing them, and they were in situations. So COVID really amplified. The risk factors were there prior, but it just amplified the dangers, because at least when they were at school, they had people that they could reach out to for assistance and for help. And then when they were isolated at home, that wasn't happening. So we saw globally really a lot of data and research numbers coming out showing how, just in general, violence, abuse, intimate partner violence, all these things went up during the pandemic. People kind of just in close quarters, not having their normal places to go to talk to people, their networks. And so there was just it just made a bad situation even worse.
Yeah,
and I would also add, if you think about internet exploitation, that also kind of spiked, right? I mean, OnlyFans, all these kind of sites out there, it's not just direct physical contact, it's also via the internet. So that, I think, also you could see an influx of that type of activity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Which goes into our next question. What are the types of, or what are the forms of human trafficking? I know, Dana, you're talking about a few things right now about OnlyFans and sexual exploitation on websites and that kind of industry. You guys can please chime in, whoever would like to answer this question. But yeah, I mean, I know there's multiple, but unfortunately, the two common ones that everyone keeps on talking about, or the most three, is sexual exploitation or sex trafficking, human trafficking, and labor. But I'm pretty sure there's way more than that, unfortunately.
Well, there's also, organ trafficking that happens abroad. And, again, I'm sure a lot of other subtypes that occur. The most common ones, because they're most talked about, is sex trafficking and labor trafficking. But, when you think about sex trafficking, you think about the kind of the subgroups, the venues, right? So first you think about it, is it happening in the country in which you reside? So that's domestic sex trafficking, right? Or is it happening between countries? That's international sex trafficking. And then you think about things like survival sex. So it's not even exchanging sex for money, it's exchanging sex for survival, right? For a place to stay, for that shower, for a bed to sleep in, right? There's, escort services, there's interfamilial, meaning someone in your family is having you have sex for something in exchange. So there's many, many different subtypes, and, all of them are, bear their own kind of trauma that's associated with them, or complex post-traumatic stress disorder. And then when it comes to labor trafficking, it's very similar. What country is it happening, and what's the location? And given the location, that's where certain venues become more popular. So in New York City, for example, kids selling candy on the subway or on the street corners selling magazines, like, that always gives me pause. So I think it really just depends where you are and what the circumstances are. And that's really how I sort of think about it, is, kind of what is the context.
Yeah. Walanda and Laura, just talking in regards to New York State and New York City. Laura, being a survivor that was, unfortunately, you're incarcerated, you are now a leader and, somebody that everyone looks up to because you're such a strong person and a strong woman. What are the most common types in Long Island that of trafficking that people, don't really see that's going on, or it's more common within certain groups?
Right. So you have to also, how the penny, what do you call them? The people that are popping up asking for change.
Yeah.
Other form of trafficking that we're seeing that has been going on that's like fairly new in our area. I know that it had been happening already, like down south and stuff like that, but I don't think people thought of it as trafficking. But we're finding that that's exactly what is happening.
Yeah.
They're popping up more and more on every corner, every highway type of deal. So that I would absolutely say those are the ones that people don't even know or even think about. That's one of the ones.
Yeah. Well, and I know you've spoken so many times at the United Nations. What have you seen in the city itself, in New York City itself, has been a bigger, or underestimated form of human and sex trafficking in general?
Well, I know for Suffolk County, we have a high rate when it comes to labor trafficking. So we think about certain areas that are like, farming, like the agricultural side, and mining and such. So we find that mainly like in Suffolk County. When the human trafficking program at Huntington had their pilot program, Dr. Paul's and that starting team had went to other partners with Polaris Project, and they were showing that the Suffolk County area was like higher than the national average when it came to labor trafficking, so we focus on those things. And in the city, it's been mixed. A lot of the work for the UN was more focused like the international part. Yeah. So like Dr. Kaplan had said when she mentioned like organ trafficking. So when we did some research in other countries, we found like how high organ trafficking was in certain areas, compared to like the survival sex trafficking, like those things that we don't mention. And I think a big thing that happens too, it's like that myth that human trafficking is about like the moving and the traveling, the transportation of people, and mixing that part with like smuggling and human trafficking. But it's not. There are children that can be trafficked in your own home, in your own area, in your own neighborhood. So sometimes like people kind of get that like mixed up, that it's actually the moving, especially the I-95 corridor, when we talk about moving people, but it's not the same as like human smuggling or the moving of people. But in the city, it just varies, honestly. Like Dr. Kaplan had said and Dr. Paulson, everyone said, it really varies according to your area.
That's amazing. And it's the organ part. Organ trafficking is something that you really don't hear about much here in the United States. But I have heard over the news or reading articles of people from the United States leaving our country and going abroad to get an organ transplant because they don't want to be on the list, which is something pretty amazing, and definitely having to shine a bigger and brighter light on that topic as well. Which leads me to my next question. What happens if these traffickers are caught and convicted? Laura, I know from your story, what happens to these people, these quote unquote bad guys, when they're convicted? Do they go to jail? Are they held accountable for their actions?
No, yeah, they absolutely go to jail. Depending on the severity of the situation, or the girls that, or men, or whoever it is that testify, it may depend on how long they actually go in for. But I think that I don't say bad guys, because I think that there are people who have had trauma and have been through stuff as well. And what I would really like to see is them get the help that they need before coming home, like severe counseling and stuff. And, we have established in Suffolk County reentry programs and stuff like that to help everybody. I think that that's where we need to work on more, is in our incarceral system with these people who have committed these crimes, so that they don't occur again. And, they change and they do a 360 with their own selves as well. We hope that everybody in jail can go for 10 or 15 years. If you have a 20-year-old that goes to jail for 10, 15 years, he comes home in his 30s. Has he changed? We think so, because their age is different. But did they actually get the knowledge they need and the help that they need when getting out, not to turn back into that life? That's what I question.
Yeah, which is, pretty interesting, because we want to be able to give the resources to everybody to change and help out and, better their lives, which is like a helping hand or education and awareness to this topic, right? Because, just clinically speaking, you can't really look for a victim of human trafficking or sex trafficking. Unless the person decides to tell you their story, like you, Laura, which is incredible. But we have to find ways to raise awareness and educate, which is for the next question. Is there a legal instrument to combat human trafficking? Is there a way anyone could just, say, like a magic wand, like 1, 2, 3, we're able to get this and let it go away?
Absolutely not.
I wish. I always say I wish I could be out of a job.
I say that laughing because we really sit down sometimes in meetings and think about all these intricate ways to go about things and go about the buyers, but people always find a way, loopholes and ways around everything, right? So unfortunately, it's probably never going to go away, but giving people knowledge, and I think really just all these task forces that have been formed, I think can help people, our community safer, and that's the best we could really hope for, right? I don't think to eliminate trafficking, I used to say that we're going to end trafficking, like I still say that, but I'm probably not in my lifetime. Like there's just it's just too broad of an issue.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's like a single method that's gonna bring it down, right? I forgot where I heard this, but they were talking about like if we could have an entire generation where parents truly loved all their kids and just really supported them, we actually could break the cycles of a lot of problems. How realistic is that, right? I mean, I think that is the solution. We talk about like they call the 3 Ps. There's actually about 6 now that we would say. That's kind of like the different broad areas of how we would address fighting human trafficking, like protecting those that are vulnerable, prosecuting those that are in the situation where they're actually trafficking others. It's not as simple, like Laura was saying, like, I mean, hurt people. So sometimes people who've been trafficked become traffickers, right? So it's very messy. It's not so black and white. And so we want to, kind of like what we're doing here, this is like more on the prevention side. That's, another P. We talk about partnerships, like working together. So it's going to take people in the community doing things together. Change, like advocacy work, actually having policies in place, right? So we can have laws there, but if the police aren't enforcing them, what does it matter? We do need to have more policies and more laws in place. And recently I heard a 6th P, and I was like, oh, this is actually a nice P. It's a P of prayer. And I think that, as people of faith, we need to come together and acknowledge that we need some help. And, hopefully that'll help break down some barriers and be able to like make a difference. But yeah, I don't think there's any one way to attack it. I think we got to have a multifaceted approach.
You're very right. And it's actually, me and Dana are leading the task force for Staten Island, and we constantly try and bring to awareness that what human trafficking was 10 years ago is completely different than it is right now. And I think that is the biggest stereotype. And the biggest difference also from 10 years and 20 years ago is technology, which is the biggest role that it's playing in human and sex trafficking right now. So the question is right now, what is the role of technology in human trafficking?
I'll let Dana answer that one.
Thank you. I think that, technology has its, positives and not so positives. Technology is bringing us here tonight together. Technology allows us to spread knowledge and awareness, right? However, it also, I think that it allows for connections that might not be the healthiest at times, to say the least. I think that we talked earlier about places like OnlyFans, which again, is there's a documentary on Hulu that I would recommend, watch, because although these are adults who are consenting, on the surface, you can see that the drive is to put more content up so that they earn more money. And there's this false sense of security because they're doing it with someone who allegedly cares about them. So I think that it's provided a lot more platforms for this exchange to happen. And you also don't know who you're encountering, right? So are you, a 50-year-old person trying to, talk to a 13-year-old child? And that's impossible to know. So I think that there's a lot of danger out there, but also a lot of, obviously there is good points to technology. I think that, however, most of these interactions do happen face to face. I think, kind of circling back to something Laura said in the beginning, which I also say myself, it's not like the movie Taken. Again, I'm sure that happens, but that's not really it. It's more like Sadiq, you've heard my spiel on this. It's more like the movie Frozen, right? Where it's someone who's looking for love and looking to be accepted, and some person comes into their life and says, I want to love you, I want to accept you, I want to take care of you, but really they have an ulterior motive. Sorry, I probably ruined that movie for so many people, but
we both got it, Dana. It's okay.
Thank you. I'm gonna watch it 50 times.
The first one with the God kids, I'm like, no,
that's not how it works. But I think that, that's largely how a lot of interactions happen. Maybe it's not through face-to-face all the time, but text messaging, Snapchat, Twitter, places where people connect now, the usual places where people connect.
Yeah, which is pretty scary, because like you have kids as young as 6 or 5 years old having these cell phones, and no judgment to any parents out there, but again, it's not about your children. It's scary what they're putting themselves into and what's out there. That's the scary part, is you can control your child, but you can't control the surrounding. And
I have a 6-year-old glued to his iPad right now, full disclosure. And sometimes he watches things and I'm just like, what are they saying? So, even though I have every parental control, and I'm a pediatrician, and I'm supposed to, internet safety, I have everything possible, and still sometimes things slip through. So I think, in terms of prevention, in terms of awareness, it's about talking to your kids, right? And so I always say, if you see something that you don't understand, or you see something that worries you, tell me, press the pause button and talk to me. And I say the same thing to my daughter, just stop for a minute and come get me. And then we can kind of unravel it, right? Because there's only so much we can do. Sometimes in these YouTube videos with Peppa Pig, there's some adult saying some crazy stuff in the background. It's impossible to catch those things.
Yeah, which is amazing, because, society today, when you talk about OnlyFans to different people, some people are accepting of it and definitely not relaying or, saying that this is a part of human and sex trafficking. But then when you bring it up to them in a form that it is, then they're like, oh, I never saw it in that way. I'm consenting, and I'm selling it to somebody that wants it. Which is, amazing, because society is labeling things currently what they want to see in their own eyes, or blindfolding themselves, and allowing things to happen. Reading an article about the Playboy magazine or the Playboy Mansion a few years ago, back in the day. Did our parents ever say about that? Was that a form of sex trafficking and human trafficking? Depends on who you ask, correct? So,
well, I think that in order for you to say that this is consensual or this is your choice, you have to have an actual choice. You have to have something of equal value, right? Or equal whatever, to say, I'm choosing X over Y, and they're equivalent. And I would say that based on the research, based on, kind of clinical practice, that really doesn't happen very frequently. I think the statistic is less than 1% of those that are in the sex work industry actually have a choice, actually choose this because they have something else where they can earn the same income as something else. So that's a very minuscule portion of those that are doing this. So I think that, when you think about choice, you have to think about what that choice is.
Correct.
Yeah, often it's like a choice between two bad options, right? And so I think something that we had heard from organizations that we were partnering and working with during COVID was that survivors who had lost their jobs were choosing to go back into a situation where they were getting trafficked because they just needed to provide for their families, needed to put food on the table, and this was something they knew how to do that. So it's often a situation of desperation, a situation where there's a choice between just some really bad options.
So then, when it comes down to a question, why don't these, once these victims unfortunately are in the circumstance that they're in, why don't they escape? How can they escape? Laura, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, it totally depends on the situation that you're in, but oh man, like that's another question that you can't just answer. I think that it goes with the individuality of the person and what they're going through, or why they don't or they can't. Some people literally can't, and then you have people who, and I like what Dr. Kaplan was saying about the choice thing, because I always said people I speak with the sex workers project and stuff, they're like, no, but our girls want to do that. I'm like, but when they were in kindergarten, did they say that's what I want to grow up and do? Is it because it's a choice or it's because they have no choice, right? So I forgot what your question was because I went on top.
No, the question was, why don't these victims try and escape?
Why don't you? I mean, oftentimes a lot of girls do try to get out, and guys or whoever's in the situation, they do try to get out. But when you're hopeless with no identification, no means, no way to even, you can't, or you're so lost on the drugs that you don't even know your real name. Like my name was something else for many years while I was out there. You literally don't know how to get out. You don't know what to do. You just feel so stuck in that situation. And like I said, those are the people who can actually get up and walk out. There's some people who can't just get up and leave their situation. You have 14-year-old girls, 15-year-old girls living with their parents, and it's their mom that's, exploiting them. So there's literally some people who cannot leave their situation.
Thank you for that, Laura. I think that's something that everyone needs to hear because, unfortunately, it's that misconception or stereotype that, oh, okay, the police is right there. Why can't they just go to the police and ask the police for help? So it's, again, Dana, you gave me that look.
Well, I think that
you're the expert that and superhero. You guys are all superheroes in my eyes, So
but that's kind, but I don't know about that. I think that the police aren't necessarily trained to work with the complexity of what's going on here. A lot of victims get re-traumatized in going to the police or going to someone who doesn't understand the complexity. Even going to the healthcare community, I've had patients say to me, I don't trust doctors. You judge, you don't help, and I've seen it in real time, and I completely appreciate that. So, I know that who Mr. Rogers used to say, go find the helpers. I think sometimes it's really hard to find out who the helpers are.
Yeah. And as clinicians, what can we do to help these victims? Laura, you're in the situation. If you had to come to the emergency room, or if you had to see a nurse or a doctor, and you are still in your situation, what would you have done to ask, or what could you recommend us to do as clinicians in order to help anybody in the situation, anyone that's going through any kind of trauma?
Oh, well, one of the things that we're aiming for now is for the question to be an actual question. When you can be asked that person what they're going through, is everything okay? There were times when I was in the hospital because I had abscess and stuff from my using, and nobody had asked me like, oh, well, when you leave today, where are you going? Like, did you eat today? Like, you know what I'm saying? There was never any more than let's just hurry up and take care of this drug addict and get her out of here. So I think questions are important, and I think they need to be asked.
Now, like, Dr. Santosh and Wanda and Dr. Kaplan, what are your thoughts on this?
I think build a trusting relationship, spend time with your patients, and provide healthcare. If you're coming to me for something, it should be addressed in a patient-centered, trauma-informed, culturally sensitive manner. And you're right, all of those other things need to be considered. You could be coming into the hospital for appendicitis. We need to know how you're getting home. Where is home? Do you have a home? Do you have food in that home? Do you have someone who's going to help you as you recover? What is your situation? And I don't think we spend enough time on that. And that's why I think a lot of times individuals who come to healthcare seeking help get re-traumatized because of that.
Yeah, I mean, I would just add to that. I feel like Dr. Kaplan kind of covered a lot of it. I mean, I think something that I learned from Dr. Kaplan a long time ago was that, we do need to take our capes off. We're not here to rescue people in those situations. We need to identify what their needs are, what what resources can we connect them with. We need to empower them. We need to educate them, to help them to realize their rights, helping them to kind of like move towards getting assistance and getting help, but helping to empower them to do that. I think it's very dangerous for us to push them before they're ready. We had a patient that was in our L&D, labor and delivery department here at Huntington Hospital, who the nurses, rightly so, were suspicious that she was in a situation where she was getting trafficked. And I just remember everybody just had a hard time. She did not disclose, and she did not say she was in a situation to be trafficked. And so everybody felt like, oh, we really need to connect her to get to resources. And I said, how are you going to connect somebody to resources when they're saying that they're not in that situation? And we all had a hard time letting her get discharged. We all felt a little bit bad. She came back a month later and she said, I am being trafficked. I need help. And she just needed to get her family into safety, into a situation where she could accept that help. And so it was a good lesson for all of us, even though we all felt uncomfortable. It was the right thing to do. She's an expert for her own life, and she knows what she needs when she needs it. And so I think as clinicians, we need to really truly respect people and respect their wishes, because we can cause a lot of damage and harm, even though we might be well-intentioned and mean well. And so, yeah.
I just want to add one Dana-ism that, since we're all like using one,
Yeah.
so we have to remember, like, disclosure is not the goal. It's about building rapport. And I think oftentimes, like in the situation that Dr. Paulus just mentioned, it's just like, well, I made the identification, I'm just waiting for them to just disclose. Come on, I see it. And it's like, no, it's about building rapport and just assessing those needs. And that has happened in some cases with us too. We had a patient that came into our emergency department, and she came back 6 times, and she built rapport with one of our social workers. And by her, every time she came in, she was looking for Judy. She was looking for that's all she wanted, and that was her social worker. And, she navigated the entire process. But if everyone was just looking for the disclosure and everything, it just may not have had the ending that it did, So we have to remember that too. It's not about disclosure. It's not the goal. It's about building rapport.
Correct. Mm-hmm. I think, and the Dana-ism that I learned is trauma-informed care, and she's laughing now. But it is true, because like Laura was saying, every victim is different. But when you decide that you're not looking for somebody that is being trafficked, but you're actually looking for someone that is going through trauma, that is more common. And then when you crack the eggshell first, then you can get to the egg, and you're able to get to everything else. So for me as a nurse, learning from Dana, who is truly amazing, you're just like, okay, well, actually that makes more sense, because trauma is very common. When you think about somebody that's going through abuse, you think about somebody that is going through, drug addiction. then you're able to build that repertoire, trust and everything, and then go step by step and pillar by pillar from there, which is something interesting, because we don't think that, victims of trafficking really come to the hospital or clinics or urgent cares. But how often is it that they actually come through our doors? Or how often do they interact with healthcare providers?
Often. My patients are worried about their bodies, and that's usually what I start with. I kind of don't start asking a lot of probing questions. When I have a patient where I have some concerns, I say, tell me about your worries. Tell me about if you have any worries about your body. Let's talk about that. And when we reframe it again to focus on healthcare, to focus on taking care of your body, then I'm not asking anything of you, right? I just want to make sure that you're healthy. And so when it becomes less transactional, I feel like that's when I've been able to connect with people more. And then after I've demonstrated that I'm going to take care of you and you can tell me what's going on, or if you're not in a place to tell me what's going on, that's cool. Eventually, after seeing people multiple times, snippets of the narrative start to come through. And then, you have to take that information in and be non-judgmental and not feel shocked by it, and really truly be there for that individual. So I think that in my experience in the literature, like, it reflects that people care about their bodies. People are worried about their bodies, and they come to healthcare because of that reason.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think it's sad to say it this way. I mean, in human trafficking, the people are the products, right? I mean, it's a business, and so oftentimes even those that are doing the trafficking want to take care of the product that's making the money for their business, and so sometimes they're the ones that are actually bringing in the individuals and the people that need healthcare. And like Dana mentioned, some of the literature, we often quote like this Loyola study that talks about how up to 88% of survivors of trafficking state that they accessed healthcare while they were actively being trafficked. That's like one study that we often quote. And then there's another study called the CAST LA study that puts numbers around 65%. But either way, it's very often.
Yeah. So what can healthcare organizations do to teach providers to ask questions to help the patient as a whole? What kind of questions can we, instead of saying, are you human? Are you being sexually trafficked? What kind of questions can we, ask to get to that point, to, get those or see those red flags, other than, a victim coming in for, birth control or an STD test. Laura, what would you think that, we could ask, or possible notions?
There's so many, but I think definitely, what is your stability like? Questions just referring to regular stuff that you may see something that may be strange or maybe off, and that can you to other questions like, how do you provide for yourself, or whatever the case may be.
And, we were discussing this earlier, but when we have a victim coming in from any background, we want to be able to have the resources, but also provide the care. So how are we able to make sure and gain this trust with the patient or the victim to be able to come back to our doors again, so we're able to provide them the care? Do we give them a referral right then and there and tell them, hey, I can make you an appointment, or will that push them away? Or do we tell them, hey, we're always here for you if you need to come back?
Right. And I think what's important too is have like resource pamphlets and stuff ready, available in office. That way, if they want to just sitting there and they're taking a look and they might want to pick it up themselves or something, I think that's important.
Absolutely. So providing resources and education. not only to the staff, but also to the victims.
Right.
So the providers are able to give it to the community as a whole and to the victims that are coming through our doors.
I think it's good if providers have a trauma-informed lens when it comes to, their patients, and it's like patient-centered, victim-centered approach when it comes to not just the identification, but it's a conversation. And if we go in like questions, it's just like becomes this whole checkbox system when we're just checking off boxes. I asked about this, asked about that. But if we're using a trauma-informed approach to whoever may come into any type of facility, our EDs, our L&Ds, our clinics, and we're thinking and having that mindset, we're able to have these conversations and not just check boxes and questions. So I think it's good and you can tell the difference too. It's a practice that we can use in all types of practices when it comes to a trauma-informed approach to care, or just to, the communication, or to anything. So I feel that's really important for providers and healthcare organizations to know and understand.
100%. And one of our last questions that we have is, how do we educate kids? How do we talk about this situation to school-age children and tell them what human and sex trafficking is, or what is trauma?
Okay, so I worked with ECPACT USA on actual curriculum, which it was passed in New York State, where the Aaron's Law, where it's actually has to be like brought up into the schools in their curriculums. But I think what's super important and where to start, and for the is social media safety. Like, I think that's a really big one, and you can start as young as 5 years old, with that. I think that one is most important with our children's this day and age.
We talk about stranger danger, right, with our kids. So it's
I don't.
People, they think that stranger danger, or something even else that people talk about, which I don't disagree, was when I growing up, my mom would like to be like, "Oh my God, I'm going to bring the police. I'm going to tell the police that you're being naughty or something." But in reality, the police should be something that,
a good thing,
safeguard, right? Or I tell my kids, if I'm not here, you look for a woman that has children, or you go to the front counter and you ask for your mother, and you don't need to give out, any other information than what they ask you. So how would you go about explaining this to kids, Dana?
I had to explain it to my 10-year-old a couple weeks ago. She caught the tail end of one of these things, and she's like, "What were you talking about in there? Why weren't you putting me to sleep?" So I was like, wow, how do I break this down to a 10-year-old? First, you have to talk about sex. If you're going to talk about sexual exploitation, you have to talk about sex, right? And you have to talk about sex that, people want to have and people don't want to have. So you have to have an open conversation about sex if you're going to even dip your toe into the area of sex trafficking or sexual exploitation. And then, I think you have to use very concrete, plain language. I try to give it to them straight. Otherwise, they're going to Google it and they're going to come up with who knows what. So I'll share what I told my daughter. I don't know if it's validated or helpful or anything like that, but I said, we've talked about sex before. Well, sometimes people are in situations where they have sex that they don't want to have, or they have sex because they need to eat, or they have sex because they need money to survive. And she's like, really? And I was like, yeah, that happened. She's like, you take care of people like that? I said, yeah, I take care of all people who've been in all sorts of situations. And she was like, it was like this aha moment. Because she thought I only take care of babies as a pediatrician, and I was like, nope, I take care of whole humans. So it's I just tried to use language that she understood, but we had to already have a foundation of being open and talking to one another about what sex is. Otherwise, that conversation just doesn't make sense. to me. And it's the same thing when someone comes into the emergency room or a patient comes in. I can't just dive on in and start talking about human trafficking. What's your living situation? Just, I think, Laura, you brought that up. What's your living situation like? What do you do for money? You know, are you having sex? Is it sex that you want to have? Is it sex that you don't want to have? Well, tell me about that. Tell me about the type of sex you're having, because I want to be able to take care of your body. You have to have a conversation and not, as Walanda said, just do a checkbox, because that's, I mean, nobody responds well to that. I don't respond well to that, even though I'm a doctor and someone starts asking me questions when I come in the office. I'm like, hey.
Yeah, absolutely. Is there anything else you guys wanted to add to that?
I'm just gonna like piggyback what Dana said, and just the conversation and also just listening. I've been doing a lot of community events in the high school and listening to some of the kids, and I'm like, this is sextortion. So I'm like talking to someone, I'm like, you know what that is? And she's like, what? I'm like, girl, and it's like just the whole level of it, like, girl, this is called sextortion. It's like, wait, what are you talking about? And then explaining what that is. So I'm like, all right, so he wants you to send you nudes, you know, you sent them, but now he's going to send them to everyone unless you do this, you know, like extortion, but it's regarding sex. And, you know, we're having this whole conversation and she's bringing her other friends. I'm like, miss, well, let me tell you another situation that happened. What is this? You know, and it's just like, wow, because we're not having these conversations, you know, we're focusing on the sex part, which is great. Like, yes, that's the opening, that's the introduction. And then these kids have taken the sex and just made all these different layers and branches from that. And so I think a lot of it's just listening and just being open-minded and having these conversations, just judgment-free. He's like, no, I can't tell you you're going to judge me. I'm like, I don't know you. I can't judge you. I can only judge myself. And it's just, well, this is what happened. And it's like, okay, so yep. Like, okay, let's talk about it. So I think a big part is just listening, judgment-free, and just really trying to understand.
Yeah. And like you said, education and awareness and listening, those are the biggest things. If it's listening to our kids, or the patients and victims, and building a trust in a relationship, because even with my kids, like if I'm not going to give them a trust and they're going to fear me, then they're not going to approach me with things. I think the same thing with clinicians and with anyone that you approach within the community. If a victim is going to come to you and they're going to feel like you're going to be judging them, then they're definitely not going to open up to you and talk to you about it if they don't feel like there's a safe haven. So I appreciate, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, obviously the way we speak to the kids, it has to be age appropriate to whatever level they're at. But you definitely need to go there. You definitely need to talk about the heavy stuff, talk about the important stuff. Because if you avoid the topic and just kick down the road, then it becomes a problem later on. So I think that it's just really important to have those conversations with kids. A lot of times we, as parents, sometimes we avoid these conversations and then we regret it later on, because then you're talking about it anyway, and now it's after the fact. And so it's better to go there and have it age appropriate. And then, just like Walanda was saying, you got to really give them the opportunity to actually ask questions and for us to actually listen. I think whether we're talking about patients or our kids, like I think as a father, I sometimes I talk too much. Sometimes I need to just sit and just listen, because there's so much that kids want to tell you, right? And if you just give them the opportunity, they will talk. They will tell you, but you have to give them the space, and you have to be awake and alert and energetic and actually listen.
100%. And I want to thank you guys all for joining us today for this conversation. I think we touched on so many bases and so many levels within the community, and being able to raise awareness and educate, it's just phenomenal. And that is definitely my passion. And I'm sure for the Muslim sisters of Staten Island, it's their passion as well. We will definitely be holding up these resources, the Human Trafficking Task Force for the entire system at Northwell, and leading it at the Staten Island level is definitely our goal, and bringing trauma and awareness and education. So hoping that we're able to help anybody in need at any of our sites. Laura, we thank you so much for what you do and what you bring to the table. You are definitely a strong woman and inspirational leader in the community. We definitely thank you for speaking to us and educating us, because this is something that it's coming straight from you, and again, gave me goosebumps on my skin. So I'm sure it did to many others out there.
And thank you for having me tonight.
Of course. Is there anything else anyone wanted to add before we end our talk?
I would just say thank you for giving us the opportunity to be here, to be here with you, and to have this this forum and this opportunity. I think it's important that we do come together. A lot of things that kind of, we're all unique and we're all different, so it's nice to be able to come together and actually address this and have some unity, because this is something that there needs to be a lot of cooperation and just help in society in general to be able to tackle such a huge problem. So thank you.
Yes, thank you so much for the Muslim listeners having us today. This has just been an amazing experience. I have worked with all of you individually, but to have it collectively, it's just awesome. You know, every time Laura shares her story, it's just like, I have no words. You know, it's like hearing it for the first time. She was at an event where her organization won a grant through Dr. Paulus's Cycling for Change. And they did this spoken word dance. So if anyone wants to be inspired, please look at cyclingforchange.org. And her and Shannon and oh my gosh, it was just absolutely amazing. So check it out. And just thank you so much for having us. And I love these all different perspectives and leaders in our own right. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for having me here today. This has been great.
Thank you to the experts. All of you guys are all leaders and superheroes in my eyes. So thank you guys so much for everything, and hope you guys have a good evening.
Thank you.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.